postmodernism and postmodern art. So when we get to postmodernism, if we think of a post-structuralist has taken and challenged the world and shown it to us differently, when artists employ these same tools, what they do is they show us a different way of understanding. And postmodernism is really more of a theory rather than just a movement. Sometimes people talk about postmodernism as just a movement and an era of art, but I tend to think of post-structuralist and postmodernism as a challenge to the way the world is typically seen. Yeah, so it's happening all the time. And like I said, we are now living in a contemporary postmodern world that is really informed by these ideas, and we're continually challenged in these ways. And if you look at even the TV that you watch, and you've been watching on Netflix, there's lots of examples of places where people have challenged traditional stories and shown them to you in different ways. Now, like I said, originally postmodern writings were French. You know, it's something that we can credit French philosophy with really moving us in these directions. And they really weren't concerned with clarity. In fact, they liked that being a little bit unclear and saying that there isn't just one way of looking at the world. I sometimes like to say modernism looked for universal truths. That Martha Graham said, this is a way to look at a story. This is the character. This is what the character feels. But a post-structuralist and postmodernism would say that there's multiple ways of looking at things. And there's multiple truths, not just one. So don't just give me that one example, because if you do, I'll try and reformulate it and show it to you in different ways, like we did with Goldilocks. Yeah. Here's another Geary building, which is just quite fun to look at. But the last half of the 20th century really pushed us to these ideas, and we're still living within all of that. Again, that word metagrand narrative is the one that postmodernists rebel against. Yeah. And postmodernism again means after the modern. So where modernism liked a metagrand narrative, postmodernism rebels against it in multiple ways of looking at the world. If I go really, let's just look at this one slide, because I like to show this. And again, this is probably a structuralist mind trying to decipher these things of what they mean. But structuralism is this idea that all-encompassing these theories and formulas that explain the world. Existentialism is that humans create our own pathways and our own realities. Post-structuralism, there are multiple ways, meanings, and getting at a text's meaning. Deconstruction is this process applied to traditional texts to challenge them, enhance, and adapt the meaning. Modernism is a clean and pristine world of universal truths. There are metagrand narratives, there's universality, there are pure facts. And postmodernism is this messy world of the clashing of styles without grand narratives, multiple meanings, and things that can shock us or delight us, And I also like to say often that our ideas of multiculturalism, of being able to appreciate and look at multiple cultures and how each culture looks at ideas, that is also a kind of post-structuralist idea. Yeah, that it moves us in that way as well. So anyway, that's just as a kind of very quick recap of these ideas. I think those are really quite quite important. Here are just two. Charles Bessler, he does literary criticism, and he has perhaps some of the best descriptions that I like in terms of articulating the difference between modernism and postmodernism. And here's one of the things that he says about modernism is that they were looking for a mappable way of looking at the world and humanity. And if we looked at a map, we could see the truth of the map. We could see the rivers, the forests, and we place our trust in the map, that the map shows us where everything is and what we will see and encounter on the journey. So for a modern mind, that reality, that objective reality, that knowable, mappable world is really important. Yeah. Then he would say that the postmodern core beliefs were opposite of that, that there was a skepticism about this grand meta-narrative to explain reality, that the concept of ourselves, that I am ever changing, so I am looking at the world differently, one moment to the next, and that there is no objective reality, but many subjective interpretations, that truth and subjective and perspectival are dependent on our culture, on our social and our personal influences, and that there's no one correct concept of an ultimate reality. There's no meta theory, and there's no one correct interpretation of a text. So what I hope, if you look at those two things, that mappable world and then this new world that's not mappable, that you see that they're vastly different. Now, some people can say, which world is the real world? And I would say we all probably function with both of those things. There are times where I think we look at the world very structuralist, where we try to find a formula, find meaning that makes sense, the constant, find universal truths. And then there are other moments when we find multiple ways of looking at it. And both are parts of the way our brains can work in a structuralist and an abstract way. And for me, that's the fun thing to think about, is that that's part of our human reality, is both of those things. And what's cool is to be able to look at the world and say, this is a post-structuralist who's really taken this world apart in these ways. I sometimes think the Cat in the Hat is a good example of a post-structuralist thought, because I love in that story where he's looking for something. He doesn't tell you what the thing is, but if we find everything that it's not, then we'll find it. And there's something quite postmodern about that in that process. Yeah. Here's another great picture. This is right now we're doing this piece. This is early floating. And here we have a moment of early floating. And again, very modernist world of absolute and clarity. And this is very different than some of the postmodern dance that happened after that, where there was improvisation and we suddenly were in a different realm, and even things like walking and pedestrian movement and functionalism all came into place. Again, postmodernism was a less Eurocentric. It was a more pluralistic. It was more multicultural. It was more eclectic as a movement. And what I like about it often is it's playful, it's messy, it mixes symbols and histories, and it's a collage of things that come together and collide together and give us new meanings. Here's another architectural piece where it looks like the building is peeling off here, and which is quite cool and quite fun. This was a design for a building that never got built, and this was designed to be built in Korea. And it suddenly had a huge upstir in America when this image was shown, and so much so that the idea was not created. And if you look at the image, most people, when it was explained, it's like, well, these are two towers, and this is a cloud that passes between the two towers that connects them. When this was shown to someone with an American sensibility, they looked at it in a much more structuralist way from our culture and said, this looks like 9/11 to us. And so it brought a whole other way of reading this story that was, it wasn't just an atmospheric cloud. It was a different kind of cloud. So it changed the way we read the story once that story got out there that way. Arthur Danto defined postmodernism as a series of erasures, and he said that art no longer had to be beautiful, representational, realistic, or even have subject matter or evidence of an artist's touch, that it didn't even have to look like art, that it could rebel against everything that we thought art was. And when he looked at some of the works of Andy Warhol, like the Brillo boxes, which we've mentioned in the past, that suddenly this Brillo box could look like something we picked up at Costco, but it's the work of art, and it could be displayed, this ordinary thing, like it was a work of art. Now, in the dance world, we got dance that was translated into other ways. So I like to use Pilobolus as an example here, because some of the Pilobolus work didn't look like, it came out of partnering work, and it didn't look like typical dance work, but it was making extraordinary shapes and extraordinary weight-sharing capabilities from the dancers' bodies. Yeah. And the result of all of it was really a kind of tremendous freedom and a move away even from some of the abstract place that dance and art had sort of been to. A lot of figurativeness came back into painting and dance, and narrative returned, text returned, and we could look at things, and even things that were stomach-turning or disgusting or not what we expected in the world could be there. Now, I sometimes think if we look at the world of dance history, the postmodern era was an era where they rebelled against dance technique. And I like to bring up Yvonne Rainer. She was born in 1934, still alive. And she was a founding member of the Judson Church. And at the Judson Church was an actual church that gave the dancers this space on Saturdays that they could do performances in the church space. So really wonderful for the dancers. It was downtown. It's by NYU. It even defined the era of dance, that there was what was considered, like Martha Graham's dance was uptown. And so uptown was the more ballet and the more established art dance forms. And downtown, the downtown dance scene, was the far more experimental world of dance. So Yvonne Rainer at the Judson Church, her famous thing was the No Manifesto. And here's what it is she said no to spectacle, to virtuosity, to transformation, to magic, to make-believe, to glamour, to transcendency, to the star image, no to the heroic, no to the anti-heroic, no to trash imagery, no to involvement of the performer or spectator, no to style, no to camp, no to seduction of the spectator, of the wiles of the performer, no to eccentricity, no to moving or being moved. So the No Manifesto is kind of fantastic because as a performer, if you look at that as a choreographer, you say, oh my gosh, they said no to everything. So what they put on stage didn't look like dance at all. And sometimes that's when people study dance history, when dancers study dance history and study these dances, they sometimes are their least favorite, because it's like, it's not dance. But the point was, it wasn't dance. It allowed for so many other things. I sometimes say part of the reason we can have Cirque du Soleil now, where so many things can happen in so many different ways on stage, movement and kinetic wise, is because we had these people say no, so it could disrupt the way we thought a performance was, and we could then create these new types of performances where anything goes, anything can happen, and we can create new stories from these new things. Yeah. Paul Taylor in 1957 did probably the first postmodern dance. And he did this rather motionless solo. It was a series of positions. He appeared on stage in a business suit. It was a solo called Epic, and just ordinary postures like kneeling, standing. And it was a little bit of a scandal because it wasn't what people expected a dance to be, this series of poses. Finally, I found this list of, this was in Wikipedia, which sometimes is a great source for things, but someone had posted these postmodern theater techniques and tools, and I quite liked them, that in theater, the accepted norms of seeing and representing the world are challenged and disregarded. So there's experimentation. Multiple medias collide not in a specific style. The narrative needs to not be complete or linear. The characters are fragmented, forming a collection of contrasting and parallel shards. Each new performance of a theatrical piece is a new gestalt. No intention of methodically repeating the play. The audience is integral to the shared meaning making of the piece. There's a rejection of the notions of high and low art. The production exists only in the viewer's mind as what the viewer interprets. The rehearsal process in a theatrical production is driven more by shared meaning and improvisation rather than the scripted text, and the play steps back from reality to create its own self-conscious atmosphere. This is sometimes referred to as meta theater. So I like this list because it's a kind of great way of getting at, you see, this is a very different world than what we typically think of the way of making theatrical pieces. So again, modernism, a clear world of meanings, a single point of view that we all can see, a single truth, and also a clean and clear, pristine world. Postmodernism, a world of multiple meanings, the clashing of styles, the questioning of stories and texts. And it's playful, it can be messy, and it ranges from shock to delight. Then I found this quote from Bruno Zevi on postmodernism, and he said, "Whoever decides to abandon the modern movement can now choose between Versailles and Las Vegas."